Maybe let's set the scene to start with in terms of, there's a lot of different questions in terms of how much energy is AI actually using. I think Microsoft has said that its energy use would be 6 times greater in 2030 compared to its 2030 targets in 2020 because of greater AI usage. So maybe I want to kind of set the scene and ask the question, because when we prepared that panel, we've had kind of slightly different perspectives. So Philip, if I want to start with you, because you said that the use of AI was a crisis in the making. So maybe if you want to say a few words in terms of what you're seeing in terms of the need for energy for AI.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this is obviously a really important question, and one that is somewhat imponderable at this point. Clearly, with the advent of Gen AI, with the massive acceleration in the usage of AI, data centers have seen very strong growth in energy consumption, and really it depends who you believe. And even over the last couple of years, we've seen lots of variation in what people think could be the increase in energy consumption. A bunch of forecasters broadly believe it's going to be 3x increase in the next 10 years. Could it be 6x? I mean, Microsoft are clearly there. And it'll be interesting to see what people like DeepSeek, which is obviously widely trailed, what that means. And obviously my esteemed companion here from Nvidia probably has a better idea than I do on that one.
Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I can jump straight in there. I'm at Nvidia. We're the AI infrastructure company, so we design the hardware behind a lot of the kind of AI revolution, and think keenly about energy efficiency. Because if you think at a very basic level about what AI is, it's kind of tasks out one side, but energy in the other side. So energy efficiency is really important in that, and we've seen kind of dramatic improvements in energy efficiency over the last 10 years, kind of 100,000 times improvement in energy efficiency. And I think DeepSeek is an example of where we've seen a kind of researchers, or actually not researchers, kind of hedge fund wants in producing a new kind of reasoning model and a way of doing AI that is kind of more efficient. And I think that's a good example of where AI is going in general. But we've seen just a huge increase in efficiency of training of AI models and the inference. So like using those AI models with live data over the last 10 years. The stat I kind of always use, which is if we'd seen the same efficiency in motor vehicles as we have in semiconductors since 2016, we'd now be able to drive to the moon and back on a single tank of petrol. So we are in kind of one of the most innovative, efficiency-seeking industries here, and DeepSeek is a good example of that.
I'm going to reuse that stat. I'm going to steal it from you because I think it's a good one. Lucy, you mentioned it was a bottleneck, but not an Achilles heel. So maybe you said in terms of energy usage of AI that it just kind of was a bottleneck, but not very much an Achilles heel. So maybe if you want to kind of go a bit deeper on that.
Yeah. So I agree with the previous comments that how much energy AI is currently using, or how much increase in demand it's driving, is a bit of an unknown. And as they both said very well, we can expect to see efficiencies on both the software side and the hardware side. So improved algorithms driving efficiencies, but also improved chip technologies also driving efficiencies. Having said that, I think in the near term we will see more demand from AI, not least because there are more people building more models at the moment. So even if these become more efficient over time, at the moment we're seeing an increase in demand. I think your question was about, does it need to be, is it an Achilles heel or just a short-term bottleneck? Well, I think absolutely there are solutions to address this increase in demand in the short term that might actually also be beneficial for the wider energy system. So I think there are ways that we can be thinking about the increased power demands for data centers in particular that actually might also help to integrate more renewable sources into the energy system and actually reduce costs, in particular things like costs associated with constraints in the energy system. So I by no means think it is an Achilles heel. In fact, I actually think the activities of some of the hyperscalers, one of the maybe one of the biggest favors they will do us all is actually speeding up some of the regulatory challenges, because I don't think the real challenge at the moment actually is about the supply to power these data centers. I think it remains around the regulation, things like permitting and the speed at which grid connections can be obtained.
Thank you. Rob?
Yeah, thank you. Agree with what Lucy says about the supply side constraints. I think it's also worth considering the demand side. AI is globally a very small fraction of energy generation. That's expected to grow hugely, but no one's quite precise about that. The way the generative AI industry is set up at the moment is that AI businesses are still working out their business models. This is fueled by private investment. It is not. We as the consumers of it are not paying the bills. Essentially, it's an investment boom, and we'll need to see where that settles down. Which will at that point, when that happens, we'll see what are actually the capabilities of the models out there. What's the pricing of them, and then us as kind of consumers of these things. It's commonly thrown around that it'll take years and years, maybe decades, to get even with what we have today, work out the right uses for it. It's very easy to say AI can do this, AI can do that, but the real question is, what is AI good for? Because AI can very easily become an inefficient and costly way to do something that can be solved by a more bespoke approach, correctly and cleanly and cheaper. AI is getting more efficient. Inference costs is adding some numbers together is still always going to be a grossly inefficient use of an AI model, even if you can do it very, very well. So we'll also see the demand side kind of stabilize and people work out what AI is really good for, because I don't expect in 10 years the conversation will be sort of the same level of hype as we see today. It'll be more focused on real use cases.
And I think the timeline you're saying is quite interesting, because as I'd like to remind everyone, ChatGPT was in November 2022. So it wasn't that long ago, if you think about it. So you both mentioned in terms of what is AI good for and what can AI do for the energy sector. And we've also got two representatives looking at the more specific nuclear sector. So maybe, Jeff, if I start with you, in terms of AI, how do you think AI can help the nuclear sector?
Well, I mean, I think we can see already that there's a number of applications that are emerging and startup companies that are out there working on them to basically address issues in the nuclear project life cycle that could help out the nuclear sector in a big way. I mean, AI is looking to sooner or later be able to greatly facilitate the design, licensing, construction, supply chain management, decommissioning. That's already having a big impact, I would say, including through robotics and digital twins and that sort of thing. So I think in short order we're going to start seeing some of these solutions appear on the horizon. The IAEA is convening a symposium on AI and nuclear in December, and we're going to be inviting a lot of these, all of the big tech companies, but some of these startup companies that are working particularly on these applications. I think in the U.S. there's already 3 or 4 that are starting to kind of make a name for themselves, and also in Europe and of course in Asia. So the hope is that a lot of the bottlenecks that exist in the nuclear project lifecycle right now could really be addressed by AI. Hopefully bringing down costs and cutting some of these timelines that have been an issue for nuclear.
And Andrew, I saw you nodding a couple of times. Obviously, you're a nuclear company. So what's your perspective in terms of what AI can do and what AI will do as well?
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, obviously, I agree with all of the ways in which AI can help us as an advanced nuclear technology company. I mean, I think that's clear, and it applies in the same way as it does to any industrial user of AI. I think the other angle of it is, how is the synergy between AI data centers and their energy demand, and how does that actually work very strongly with advanced nuclear technologies coming online, in the next 10 years or so. And we are a technology developer, but we're also effectively an energy plant developer, and we've been around the UK looking at different siting options. and as we walk around and talk to landowners, so they have all been approached by data centers. And so we're all competing for the same land, but that's actually a perfect synergy because we all need similar things, right? We all need a grid connection, but there's a demand and a supply side. The other interesting point, which you started to mention, I think a little bit around, how do you modulate the different sources of power as part of this transition that we're all enjoying? I was at a conference, a data center conference in Antibes back in the summer last year, and I think it was Google was talking about how you could, instantaneously, AI-driven and controlled, switch capacity or demand from one country to another, which of course you can't transmit power like that, but you could transmit demand like that. And so you've got this kind of perfect ability to modulate demand to match supply, which is what the energy transition needs, not only to maximize the benefit of firm power like nuclear, but also to integrate non-dispatchable power like renewables. So actually, if the three, I say traditional renewables, nuclear and data center users work together, what a brilliant system solution that could be there.
Andrew, how do you think about you mentioned the 10-year interval until realistically AMRs, SMRs are going to start appearing. How do you think about the gap between then, or the interval, and what data centers might do in the meantime?
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge we've all got, right? And people have talked about the growth, 6 times or something that we're going to be seeing until 2030. And then beyond that, who knows what, right? So we've all got to have a long-term view and a short-term view. Grid, to some extent, can meet short-term views, and I know that the sort of net zero team in current government are considering short-term, but we also need to be looking at long-term, and we need to be thinking, what is the long-term sustainable solution that best deals with rapid upscaling? And I think that's where nuclear really can come along. But actually, of course, it can't solve the next 5 years, but it can solve 10 years. So for me, that's not a reason not to adopt a nuclear solution. But actually, yes, we need to look at a short term, and actually sites, projects, opportunities, countries that can solve that interim are the ones that are going to get the greatest adoption of the hyperscalers coming to that area.
I think the timeline is quite interesting because obviously it can't happen now. Very interestingly, when France announced their big deal, and they basically kept saying that, we've got nuclear in France, so therefore come to us because we're far more renewables and sustainable than some of our competitors in other countries. I kind of want to ask, in terms of the relationship with kind of public policy, how important is it to get that right? Not only, I guess, for nuclear, but also in terms of renewables going forward. Anybody wants to take that, or do I just pick on something? I'm just going to do that.
I can start us off on that one. It probably is one of the least specialist people on that area. I'll give a quick intro. So I think they need to play together, right? The technologies that we're using for generation now, we need market designs that allow those to actually be deployed effectively. And so we've talked a lot already today, this morning, and in many of the sessions we had a lot of discussions about some demand side flexibility, about storage. We need markets that are going to incentivize the right behavior, and that could be in terms of scheduling industrial activity for times of low carbon intensity or the right price signals reaching them. It could be or excess renewable generation. I think in the UK we pay a lot to turn off wind turbines when there's too much wind. The process of curtailment is not what you'd ideally have. But we also need to look at kind of business processes, kind of what's going on, scheduling in cloud data centers, all the way down to kind of household level, how people can smartly schedule things going on in their house, or ideally have like autonomous systems doing that for them. But we need policy and regulations that create the markets that incentivize that activity. One thing I think here that I'm very happy to hear people tell me differently, but I feel that to get market balancing, kind of flexibility outside of specialist people operating the energy industry, you need to just have markets that give really clear price signals. That's how kind of households will respond. That's how you can easily get other businesses on board without specific subsidy schemes and offsets, etc. So the things that I'm aware that are in the works that will work towards that is we have kind of half-hourly reforms on the way in the UK markets right now, GB market. So that's going to incentivize time of use tariffs, which will provide more ways to send those price signals to like small businesses, to domestic users. And then we could talk about policy of, say, regional markets, zonal markets. So we can then create incentives to co-locate high energy demand. Could be data centers, could be anything from an industrial perspective, close to sites of renewable, which say in the UK is not. That's not really a system that exists yet in terms of wholesale markets. The pricing is unified.
Anybody else want to comment on that? Because there's collaboration, obviously, between, I guess, energy companies and governments, but there's also going to be, I guess, greater collaboration between energy companies and technology companies in there. So maybe, Andrew, and let me remind everyone, you can use Slido to ask question. With a bit of luck, it will come on one of the screen and you can see the QR code. So please do. So maybe Andrew.
Oh,
Philip.
Andrew.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think the zonal piece is quite interesting. I mean, even now you can observe, say in Ireland, about 25% of all their energy gets consumed by data centers. You can see the same thing in Virginia and the east coast of the US, and quite high levels in, say, along the A3 in the UK. And actually getting that right, which I think might come back to Andrew's point about planning and both looking for the same provider of land. If you can get co-located either or hubs set up to provide power for a range of possibly data centers or other energy intensive users, that could be quite compelling. So I think it links back to Lucy's point about, well, actually the grid are going to be the net recipients of some quite large challenges at the moment. And it's been designed for a fossil fuel based world. And depending on where you site your nuclear plants, for example, that might massively help solve some of those problems.
I mean, you mentioned France, and that the French government is putting pressure on EDF to offer favourable tariffs for people who locate data centres next to nuclear power plants. There's a similar Biden era, end of the Biden era, executive order that requires the US nuclear plants to do something similar and make space available for data centers on or around US nuclear reactors. So that's obviously a really positive signal. But then basic economics will drive the fact that a nuclear plant in the UK or anywhere else for that matter, co-located with a data center will drive a power purchase price behind the wire, which is far lower than would be available off the grid, and far lower than would be available on a kind of firm basis from any other provider. And so there should be fundamental economics that drives data center developers, nuclear power plant developers to get together, to talk, to collaborate, to do these deals, and to have a longer term vision, that allows both of those projects to move forward, even in a kind of a scaling factor applying on an individual site.
If you look at what the government's doing around AI growth zones at the moment, which is kind of facilitating that process and those connections between those who have the power and those building data centers, but also the kind of research community coming off the back of that, because it's very easy in this conversation to get kind of separated from the actual kind of output of what you're talking about with AI. And AI is not just ChatGPT, but kind of drug discovery. It's about building digital twins of nuclear reactors and things like that as well. So what the government is doing with the AI growth zones is a very interesting way of connecting up those sites. And I think they've just kind of closed the first round of expression of interest. So a lot of places in the UK have had an opportunity for kind of regional growth, particularly in those postal industrial areas that might have excess energy. And by the way, AI like data centers are really good to put on the back of unreliable supply of energy as well, because you can do something with that excess energy rather than turning off kind of wind turbines, using it to kind of train models or kind of do inferencing in data centers is a good way to kind of actually optimize the output in the long tail.
And maybe kind of moving away a bit from nuclear in terms of renewables, is it going to be a strong role also going forward, or is it kind of an even longer time frame in terms of kind of using renewables for AI and data centers? Lucy, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with the previous comments that I think nuclear is a 10+ year play, particularly for sort of traditional large scale new nuclear development. I think we're unlikely, being very realistic, we're unlikely to see anything in the West sooner than a 10-year time horizon. I know there's a lot of interest in small modular reactors. I think there needs to be more evidence around the commercial viability of those. Because they're smaller, the output is lower, and therefore the cost per megawatt hour is not necessarily currently as commercially competitive. But like I said, I think a 10+ year time frame, these are very interesting and they will play a role. In the shorter term, I think solar, wind and battery storage will be important. So we talked earlier about how we're already seeing increased demand for AI, for data centers right now. So this is at a pace of urgency which is outstripping the pace at which we can get new nuclear on stream right now. For things like off-grid solar microgrids, these are the types of things that we have the potential to complete things like site acquisition and permitting and have a full operational site maybe within a few years. So there's something that certainly could be a useful means of powering data centers and AI in the nearer term. There have been some interesting studies done looking into this. One that is in my mind was one recent study from Duke University. This looked at headroom on the grid in the US, and I think that came up with a figure of something like 100 gigawatts that could be connected, could be used to add additional data centers potentially with pretty much immediate effect, with only a small amount of flexibility from those data centers needed to support. And just to put that into perspective, that 100 gigawatts is more than the current total installed nuclear capacity in the US. So it's not trivial. So I think there's a lot of hype about nuclear at the moment. I certainly hope some of it is justified, particularly hype about fusion. But I think we do need to put this into perspective and recognise that solar, wind and battery certainly has an important role in the nearer term.
Is it justified? Jeffrey, I see you nodding.
Well, I mean, I think it is. I mean, the companies themselves are clearly signaling that this is something that they're interested in, or that they want, and that they're investing in. I mean, we've all heard the news about the major tech companies in the United States making investments in advanced nuclear companies. Those are investments that will help, get those technologies eventually commercialized. It's not going to happen tomorrow, so that's important for the development and the deployment of those technologies, not for meeting an immediate need. But a couple of things. I mean, at the IAEA, we help countries that don't have nuclear power develop the infrastructure to support a nuclear power program. So, setting up a regulatory body, human resources development, a number of different issues. And we're getting calls from countries that host data centers that have a big need, and they see this obviously growing in the near future, and they want to know, hey, how can we set up a nuclear power program? Because this is something that we envision a pretty big need. So I think that right there is a signal. In terms of like using the existing nuclear assets out there, we've also seen, like in the United States, some companies directly, doing PPAs to restart already retired assets, like at 3 Mile Island or whatnot. But also you mentioned France. I mean, that's an interesting case where they have a huge nuclear fleet. But there's a lot of room there to increase the capacity factor of that fleet. I think it's maybe at about 70% or something. Don't quote me exactly. So that could be through taking certain measures on those reactors, you could get it up to, I don't know, get it up to 85 to 90% capacity factor, which could support a lot of demand. In addition, a lot of those reactors could be uprated, I understand, by a few megawatts. And then there's the existing technologies that are already licensed nuclear technologies, the large reactors that we know about. I think we heard about Stargate, this one announcement in the United States, where I think it was $500 billion in energy infrastructure. I was recently in San Francisco talking to a big tech company, and they were very clear that they're gonna need natural gas for this right now, and in some places coal assets will be extended to support the grid. But that nuclear still for them is very much something that they want in the medium to long term, and they need to start working on that now to make it happen. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of them are looking at also their already existing designs that where the supply chains are more or less there, and if they get working now on those, in 5 to 10 years they could have them perhaps online.
I think one of the other observations links to things that various people have said. It's just around what the hyperscalers are doing. So Microsoft have got creative with the deal with Constellation, which is clearly good news. But Microsoft, Amazon, Meta all have been traditionally massive users of PPAs with renewables, and they've all, I think, signalled a direction of travel, which is that actually, having been unpicked by various people, that isn't quite as green as they might have hoped, which is where they see an opportunity with nuclear. And I guess this probably was when Nucleo come in. The AMR, SMR proposition is actually of a size where you can more directly co-locate those, and you can take yourself out of the planning nightmare that is getting permission for grid access, etc. I think that sort of direction of travel is clear in their minds, at least.
Yeah, I mean, what I would add is I don't think nuclear is and should be competing with renewables. I think they're complementary. I think we need all of them. And I think if you look at the scale of the growth in energy to deal with net zero generally, not just data centers, but also, the hard to abate sectors, we should be looking at everything we've got. And I think we need all of it. For me, let's not debate which we should have. We should get on and meet the energy needs of the future. Actually, the one issue nuclear is dealing with is dealing with the kind of legacy of the industry, part of which is kind of fear, part of which is political challenges, part of which is stop-start. So if anyone's seen Nuclear Now by Oliver Stone, it's a good watch to give some history of how nuclear is where it is. But I think it's for the developers like Nucleo to demonstrate that we can build out, that we can do it cost effectively, that we deliver a competitive LCOE, and we need to get on and do it. But again, we're the economy of many, not the economy of scale. And so to deliver that, you have to start. And again, just to use another simple analogy, if you look at, we're in the UK, right? You look at Hinkley Point and a significant amount of expenditure on one site with 2 reactors, right? If the first one goes 50% late and 50% over budget, it's a massive headline, huge, possibly tens of billions of pounds. You build 20 reactors, they're each $1 billion, and the first one is 50% over cost and 50% late. It's about $500 million, and no one's talking about it in a program of 20 billion. So you actually just need to believe, get on, do, learn, and deliver, and that's really what SMRs and AMRs are about.
Thank you. I mean, let's maybe move on a bit in terms of, we've touched on it a little bit already in terms of what can AI help us do better. I always like that quote. I'm not quite sure how reliable it is, but I'm still going to say it. Apparently, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy estimated that for every kilowatt of energy consumed by the IT sector, 10 kilowatts were saved in other sectors. So we might see more energy used by AI, but everybody else is going to be using less. So it's a net positive. So maybe if I start with you, Rob, because we talked a bit about before in terms of what do you see in terms of kind of the right framework to optimize that kind of energy demand going forward?
There's lots of ways to slice that one in terms of the numbers quoted. I'm not entirely sure of the context, but I would think that could well be true of kind of business and office operations. AI has a lot of possibilities to automate some very manual human workflows, which frees up time. I'm aspirational about that. If AI can save time from sort of human toil, maybe that leaves us all with more capacity to think about important big picture things. If the AI hasn't also automated that away. But my view on the broader topic there is from the end user perspective, and I guess the nuclear perspective gives us the other end of the chain here. But in that world of some renewables heavy dynamic grid, there's a question of, let's assume for now AI will be doing kind of scheduling, flexibility, moving a lot of load around to just kind of smooth out the output profile of renewables generation. Those systems are going to be very important. They're going to be critical infrastructure, and I think what anyone who's done an AI or machine learning kind of project or development knows that the AI is one thing, but the data sources you're feeding it with, you're training within, are critically important. So I do think, as well as the sort of market side changes I mentioned earlier in terms of, time of use tariffs are a great way to incentivize this, assuming the careful work goes in to get the right price signals. You need meaningfully kind of split up zonal markets, so you're capturing kind of the value for those renewables for businesses that want to go there but can't just like commission their own power plant to co-locate and kind of bypass the wholesale market. I think that's important for medium scale and kind of widespread adoption. But I do think what we should expect for, and in some ways this is the easy bit, but it's a bit not to forget, is we need to make sure that the platforms that are producing data on grid generation mix, on pricing under whatever tariffs and regimes and regulations exist in certain markets, through to kind of more technical details like transmission network frequency, the kind of things you're aiming to optimize on or respond to in terms of flexibility service. I think we'll start seeing those more as kind of critical infrastructure in a way that we don't really think of it that way, when most flexibility is controlled from a control room environment, kind of centrally dispatched. So I think there'll be a change to a more open distributed network there. We need to think about the kind of the data connections between all the pieces.
Yeah, Max.
One of the things that's been most interesting to me is we've mentioned this a couple of times about digital twins. So we talk about AI and kind of efficiency from a kind of a workforce level, but if we look at it in terms of the place that people work, both in kind of offices, but in industrial kind of factories, digital twins have an enormous potential to help design better processes. Like if you look around this room, there's like ventilation systems, there's lighting, and that was probably when there was nobody in here. There was the same systems were running. And what a digital twin of this room could do is kind of you use actually Gen AI to put you all in, or kind of versions of you, and then kind of model more effectively like the energy use, and you can see the kind of then you can start to see the efficiency potential across a range of things, and you transfer that small use case to industrial processes. And actually, Nvidia has done this in a factory with in Mexico with Foxconn, where we built a digital twin of the factory, and we do it with other areas as well, and we saved 30% of the kind of annual energy use, and that's going to increase all the time as you optimize the processes. And what AI allows you to do, this kind of greater scale of use of computation, allows you to make more accurate predictions, bring in kind of weather models as well to understand how that might change. And so therefore this kind of base level energy use that we might use, you can start to see it kind of optimizing it. So there is a great potential. We talk about the data center use of AI as being about 2% growing to 6%, but there's a kind of 94 to 96% of energy use in there, which is very carbon intensive, which has there's a huge potential in there.
Lucy?
Yeah, so just to add to that, I mean, I totally agree with the sentiment in your question. So we have to be really careful not to make AI the bogeyman or the bogey woman, because some of the downstream applications may actually have the potential to, as you suggest, really return orders of magnitude in terms of emission savings. I think one good example is DeepMind's AlphaFold. So DeepMind estimate that their AI model that looks at how proteins fold has saved something like 1 billion years of alternative research. And we have to remember that the counterfactual for a lot of this stuff is not something that would probably generate no emissions at all. It would still be something that's generating some emissions. So have to keep that in mind. And just to build on Max's point about the digital twin, one of the things my organization has developed is a predictive AI model for energy demand. So it's called Faraday. This is a model, it is a generative AI model, but for anyone technical, it's slightly older school Gen AI. So it's a variational autoencoder combined with a Gaussian mixture model. this is important because we need very good models of what's happening on the demand side, good models of what's happening on the supply side, so that we can optimize these at the grid or the energy system level. Both of these things, supply and demand, are becoming more complex and changing more because of our changing energy system. So even just a small improvement in the accuracy of a predictive forecasting model is very powerful and important when you put it in a real-world grid system operator context.
We're going to just have under 5 minutes to go, so I'm going to open it up for questions. Quite a few over there. Do the lady at the front, please.
Thank you very much. I just want to add something that we need to make sure that nuclear energy is not a renewable energy. Nuclear energy is a clean energy, and we rely on uranium. So once we have run out of uranium, we no longer have nuclear energy to apply. So some country import uranium, some country have uranium already. So we need to apply sustainability. We need to make sure to distinguish between renewable energy and nuclear energy. Renewable energy, which is, we know, solar, wind comes from the sun. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
It's another question. Thank you.
Can I reply as if that is a question? Because nuclear is we're developing a lead fast reactor. That's our type of technology. And a fast reactor, you can do a lot more with different radioisotopes. So our plan is to use what's called mixed oxide fuel, which is made from reprocessed spent nuclear fuel from the previous or existing generation of reactors. So in that case, we are effectively creating a circular economy of nuclear waste into nuclear fuel. So the technology exists to do that. It's been done in France throughout the sort of 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. So there is a sustainable solution to your point, and that's something that we're pursuing.
And just to add to that, I totally agree with the point that we need to be concerned about, say, uranium supplies. You know, these things are not unlimited, but it's also true that any investment in energy generation storage of any type has huge material requirement needs. We're building lots of batteries, which fundamentally requires more lithium than the world currently produces. Electrification in general is a huge demand on steel and on copper production. So there are material inputs to all sides of this. To kind of expand your point there, I think that's an important and often overlooked aspect of this. It's not just what's used to generate one megawatt hour, it's what infrastructure are we building to enable that.
I'm going to read the one on Slido, which are regulations impacting the development of AI, are sustainability goals currently discussed within policy and regulations coming out? People love to talk about regulation, so I know that's why I asked the question. Anybody? No? Okay, on the floor. Sorry if that question is anonymous, but I feel I had to. Anybody else? I think the gentleman pick whoever. I'll let you decide. Hello.
Hi, Sean McQuaid at Tide. We raise money for underprivileged kids to go to university. So if anybody got any money, come my way, please. My question is this. Pre-2022, one of the best ways of explaining what we need to do in terms of a challenge was that we had to build 1 to 1.5 nuclear power stations every day for 12,000 days. That's what we need to do to go from 35 billion tons of CO2 per annum down to net zero by 2050. Comes 2022, and then AI turns up on the scene. Now, I'm a scientist, I'm a physicist, so I'm all for science, but with Oppenheimer, as we heard earlier, it was a case of could we or should we? Now, we can definitely do AI, and the question comes, should we do AI, and what kind of AI we should do? Because the kind of growth that's required presently, even before AI turns up, was at breakneck speed in terms of renewables. I mean, for example, if you take oil and gas from the 2050s... I'm
going to have to stop you there because we've got 45 seconds to go. So maybe on that...
How do you discriminate about what should you do, what could you do?
We want to answer that in 30 seconds.
If you take supply and demand, it can't do more than there is clean power to power it. And provided we're not powering AI with coal power stations and gas-fired power stations, then surely it's okay.
But we are powering them with gas-fired and coal-powered power stations.
Right. So then back to the gentleman's question.
Well, and given that, given that data centers only consume, let's call it 2, 3, 4, 5%. I mean, you've got to believe that there's a fighting chance that AI can help offset that, more than offset that, assuming it doubles, triples. Don't know, but that's a guess.
I think that's why we'll end on that note of optimism, that AI will help rather than, create Skynet. Thank you very much to everybody on my panel. Thank you very much to all of you.